Okay, let's unpack this. I think we're all taught to see plants as, well, the definition of passive, right? They're slow, they're rooted, and they're just completely at the mercy of their surroundings. But the sources you've shared, they reveal something totally different. A creature that is, in reality, this high-fidelity, hyper-vigilant sensor network.
It's constantly observing, calculating, adjusting.
Yeah, adjusting its entire life based on this incredibly nuanced data.
It's an extraordinary feat of adaptation. I mean, think about it. Since they can't physically relocate or, run away from a threat, their single most important survival strategy is to adjust their growth patterns.
So their morphology.
Exactly. This constant directed adjustment, knowing when to bend, when to defend, when to speed up division, it's all governed by a sophisticated, really complex network of chemical messengers.
Primarily the plant hormones.
That's right.
So our mission today is to go far beyond the basics. We're doing a deep dive into the sheer sophistication of this sensory world. We're going to explore the entire spectrum of stimuli that plants can sense.
And that goes from the fundamental physical forces like gravity, which of course anchors them,
To the genuinely unexpected, things like structured vibrations and even electrical fields. We need to figure out not just what they sense, but how these complex signals get instantly translated into measurable, physical, and frankly, life-saving responses.
Right. And while we don't need to dwell on, high school terminology, it is useful to frame their responses in terms of directed movement or tropisms. A great early example is just their basic defense mechanisms.
Right. They don't have immune systems like we do. But if you actually look at a defense response, it's fast and it's brutal.
It is decisive. If a section of tissue becomes infected, the first line of defense is often a programmed, rapid cell death localized exactly around the infected area.
So it quarantines the disease.
It quarantines it, prevents the spread, and at the same time, they deploy chemical weapons, toxins. A classic example is the willow tree, which produces salicylic acid to ward off bacteria.
Which is the same compound that forms the basis of aspirin.
The very same. It just shows how plants have leveraged this defensive chemistry for millennia.
Okay, let's start with the historical groundwork. The two forces that really dictate life on Earth. Gravity and light. I feel like we often skip over just how profound some of those early discoveries were.
We really do.
You take Charles and Francis Darwin, publishing back in 1880. They weren't just observing that plants bend toward light phototropism. Their incredible insight was that the perception of the light signal and the resulting growth response were happening in two totally different places.
That is the critical piece of the puzzle. They hypothesized the existence of a sort of movable factor, a chemical messenger that was created in the tip and then transported downward.
And it was required to actually facilitate the bending.
Exactly. And, decades later, that messenger was identified as the hormone auxin, which we now know is the master regulator of plant growth.
And even before the Darwins, we're talking over 70 years earlier, in 1806 you have Thomas Andrew Knight. He proved that growth orientation was purely a function of perceived gravity.
His experiment was just brilliant. He used centrifugal force by germinating plants on a spinning wheel, one rotating perpendicular to Earth's gravity.
It was essentially tricking the plants.
Completely. The shoots grew outward, away from the center of rotation, and the roots grew inward toward the center. It definitively showed that the plants weren't just following some, inherent biological clock. They were constantly analyzing the gravity vector and adjusting.
So if the Darwins identified the message, the auxin, how did the plant figure out which way the message needed to go? How do they even sense gravity in the first place?
This brings us to the fascinating starch-statolith hypothesis. Gravity sensing is done by these specialized cells called statocytes.
And in roots, they're in one place, and in stems, they're somewhere else.
Right. In roots, they're in the root cap columella. In stems, you'll find them in the endodermis.
And the sensors inside these cells are these remarkable little tools.
They are. They're dense, starch-filled organelles called amyloplasts, or statoliths. The best way to think of them is like the small, heavy-weighted bob in a level tool.
Okay. They're heavier than the surrounding cellular material, so when the plant changes its orientation even slightly, these statoliths sediment really rapidly to the new downside of the cell.
And that physical pressure is the trigger.
That's the trigger for the signal.
Okay, so this is where the complexity just ramps up exponentially. Once that physical signal, the falling statolith, is registered, it sets up an asymmetrical distribution of auxin. And this has totally different outcomes depending on if we're talking about a root or a shoot.
That's the key distinction. Roots exhibit positive gravitropism. They have to grow down.
Hmm.
When the scatoliths fall and signal the direction of gravity, it causes auxin to concentrate on the lower side of the root.
Right.
But critically, this higher concentration of auxin actually inhibits cell elongation on that lower side.
So wait, if I'm understanding this right, the root isn't growing down because auxin is telling the lower side to grow faster. It's growing down because auxin is actively slowing down growth on the bottom side.
Yes.
That seems completely counterintuitive. It is entirely counterintuitive, but it's the mechanism that works. The cells on the upper side, where there's less auxin, they continue to elongate normally, and that effectively pushes and bends the entire root downward.
And STEM does the opposite.
The stem does the opposite. It has negative gravitropism. It grows up. The same lateral redistribution of auxin happens, but in stem tissue, high auxin levels promote cell elongation, causing the stem to bend away from gravity.
A single chemical message, but it performs opposite actions based on the tissue it's in.
Precisely.
This relationship between light and gravity and the chemical changes, it's so strong on Earth that researchers realized they just couldn't isolate the variables properly, which is why we have to talk about the microgravity challenge.
Exactly. Terrestrial methods like the clinostat, they only simulate microgravity by constantly rotating the plant, which just introduces other rotational stresses. To really, truly decouple light and gravity, they had to go to space.
To the International Space Station.
To the ISS, yeah.
And what those ISS experiments revealed is that microgravity is far from a neutral environment. It's a genuine stressor for the plant.
It profoundly disrupts the plant's internal coordination, specifically something scientists call meristematic competence.
Which is that fine-tuned balance between cell division and cell growth.
Right. The balance between proliferation making more cells and growth, which is making the building blocks like ribosomes. Under microgravity, these two processes become uncoupled, and you get disorganized development.
And auxin is the main suspect.
Auxin is the primary suspected mediator linking that initial lack of gravity sensing to all this subsequent cellular chaos.
Which sounds like a huge long-term problem for any kind of future space agriculture. If your building blocks are disorganized, you can't get a stable crop.
Precisely. But here's one of the most surprising findings from the ISS. There's a potential electromagnetic countermeasure.
Okay, tell us about the red light fix.
Well, researchers found that specific red light irradiation, which is mediated by the plant's light receptors, called phytochromes, can significantly counteract this gravitational stress.
So it's like a pharmaceutical intervention.
It's almost exactly like that.
Yeah.
It downregulates those auxin-responsive genes that were running rampant, and at the same time, it upregulates essential growth coordinators. It basically helps the plant restore that critical meristematic competence it needs.
So it can develop normally? Even in 0G.
Even 0G.
It's just amazing how plants adapt to those fundamental physical laws of gravity and light. But if we move away from those massive physical forces, what about the invisible sensory world? The one we rarely credit them with. You know, subtle energies, vibrations, sound.
Right, so we're transitioning from the world of dense steatoliths into the fascinating field of plant bioacoustics. And this research really validates a persistent old intuition, the idea that plants can sense, respond, and maybe even communicate through frequencies.
I mean, we've all heard about people talking softly to their basal plants. Was that just folklore? Or is there a real biological basis for plants sensing sound?
The science says yes, there is a basis. They absolutely detect and process vibrations and frequencies, just not through, conventional ears or a nervous system. They use three really ingenious physical mechanisms.
Okay.
The first one is their structure, the cell walls themselves.
So the whole plant is essentially one giant eardrum.
More or less, yeah. These cell walls are flexible structures, and they're constantly saturated with water. When a sound wave passes through, the physical pressure causes these walls to vibrate, just minutely.
And that mechanical stimulus is immediately translated into internal signals.
Instantly. Things like shifts in internal calcium ion levels or the firing of electrical potentials.
And that shift in calcium, that's usually the starting gun for so many physiological responses, isn't it?
Absolutely. The second mechanism involves specialized structures in the cell membrane called mechanoreceptors. You can think of them as microscopic pressure gates.
And they can differentiate between different kinds of vibrations.
They can. They respond specifically to touch, pressure, and sound, and that helps the plant tell the difference between a gentle harmonic vibration like soft speech or the wind and a sharp stressful vibration like, say, heavy machinery or noise pollution.
Okay. And the third mechanism relies on the fact that a plant is basically a column of water.
Exactly. Plants are typically 80 to 90% water, and water is an exceptional conductor. So any external vibration, footsteps, music, distant rumble, it travels through the plant tissue like ripples across a pond.
And those ripples can influence things like nutrient transport.
Nutrient transport and, critically, the distribution rate of those all-important chemical messengers, the hormones.
And all this sensitivity translates into concrete, measurable physical responses.
Yeah.
Things that affect survival and growth.
Measurably so. We see significant increases in the rate of cell division and overall growth, often stimulated by that rapid flux in calcium ions that sound waves kick off. But the truly astonishing finding is about root navigation.
I remember reading about this. The roots can sense water without actually touching it.
Yeah, experiments have shown that plant roots can detect the distinct sound or vibration patterns created by moving water. And they can use that to guide their growth toward the source, even when there's no direct moisture gradient to follow.
That just fundamentally changes how we perceive a root. It's not just passively absorbing nutrients.
Not at all. It's using information that travels through space to actively locate its most vital resource.
So it transforms the root from a passive consumer to an active locator. And it's using bioacoustics as its long-distance navigation tool.
And this knowledge has practical applications. Researchers have found that soft, specific sound waves can help plants cope with intense stress, reducing cellular shock after something like repotting, or even improving drought tolerance.
Oh, it's not about the tune, it's about the structure.
Yeah.
A plant doesn't prefer jazz over rock.
No.
It prefers coherence over chaotic noise.
That is exactly it. Chaotic, incoherent noise induces stress responses, it leads to stunted growth. But on the other hand, specific harmonic frequencies in research has looked at things like 432 hertz, 528 hertz, or even the Earth's natural 7.83 hertz Schumann resonance. They consistently support greater metabolic efficiency, increased growth, and overall vitality. These harmonic structures just allow the plant's internal systems to regulate more smoothly.
Which is why soft, calm human voices, which tend to generate more harmonic vibrations, can demonstrably reinforce plant health.
That's the connection.
Yeah.
Our final section takes us into what is probably the fastest language plants speak: electrophysiology. We're exploring the idea that plants use internal electrical signals that far outpace the relatively slow transport of their chemical hormones.
We tend to think about plant communication entirely through chemistry, but the evidence is just overwhelming. They're constantly running a complex electrical systems, almost like a primitive nervous system.
Precisely. Plants generate electrical signals, primarily what we call action potentials, or APs, and variation potentials, VPs. Now, these aren't nerve impulses, but they are rapid, controlled fluxes of ions, things like hydrogen, potassium, chloride, sodium, and calcium.
Rushing across cell membranes.
Exactly. And these electrical pulses influence critical rapid functions like the quick movements of organs, changes in turgor pressure, and even the rate of photosynthesis. And because these signals are so rapid and measurable, they offer a really tantalizing opportunity.
Which is to turn the plant into a living biological sensor that can report on its environment in real time.
That's the vision. If different external stimuli cause distinct electrical signatures, we can leverage the plant itself as a multiple stimuli sensing device. And researchers conducted some meticulous controlled experiments using tomato and cucumber plants to detect specific environmental pollutants.
And these pollutants were chosen to mimic severe real-world problems.
They were. They chose a highly heterogeneous group to make sure discrimination would be a challenge. They used sulfuric acid, which represents acid rain.
Okay.
Ozone, a primary component of tropospheric smog, and sodium chloride, which models salinization stress from road salt or irrigation.
So walk us through the technical setup. How do you capture these tiny signals?
It was meticulous, designed to completely isolate the plant's electrical response. The plants were wired with stainless steel needle electrodes inserted at 3 critical points in the stem top, middle, and base.
And you have to block out all the external noise.
You do. To prevent any external electromagnetic noise from corrupting the readings, the entire apparatus was housed inside a Faraday cage. Then they introduced the pollutants one by one, continuously recording changes in the plant's electrical amplitude.
And were the signals actually different enough to matter? Could they really tell the difference between acid rain and smog?
Absolutely. The electrical signatures showed really distinct patterns based on the type of stimulus. Acute chemical stressors like the sulfuric acid and the ozone cause sudden, sharp spiking changes in the electrical signal, a rapid, high-amplitude alarm.
Okay, but the sodium chloride was different.
The salt, the salinization stress, caused a much slower, more gradual change in the electrical response.
Why the difference in timing?
It speaks to the nature of the stress. Sulfuric acid and ozone cause immediate acute chemical damage. It's almost like an electrical short circuit, triggering an instant ion flux alarm.
But sodium chloride is an osmotic stress.
It is. It draws water out of the cells gradually, leading to a slower change in turgor and membrane potential. This ability to generate signatures distinct enough to classify the type of damage acute versus osmotic, that is incredibly informative.
And the statistical analysis confirmed this discriminatory power, right?
Yes. By analyzing the statistical features from these electrical signals, they could successfully discriminate between the effects of sulfuric acid and ozone with an accuracy over 73%.
That's phenomenal.
It is. The plant is generating a signature electrical response specific enough for external instruments to classify which environmental threat it is actively facing.
Which suggests a pathway for holistic, real-time environmental monitoring. You could leverage the natural abundance of plants to do the complex chemical classification work for us at a fraction of the cost. So let's try to synthesize what we've learned today. We've covered this extremely sophisticated sensory portfolio that plants have. The growth response driven by hormones, the complex navigation rooted in mechanical pressure with statoliths, the critical feedback loops between light and gravity.
And that surprising high-speed sensitivity to structural vibration and electrical charge.
And we saw the powerful implication of that ISS research, that red light can act as this crucial counter-regulator, overriding gravitational stress at the most fundamental cellular level.
Restoring that necessary developmental coordination.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting and provides a massive opportunity for deeper thought. If, as that biosensor research definitively shows, plants use immediate, distinct electrical signals to identify and respond to specific chemical stresses like acid or smog or salt.
And we know that microgravity immediately disrupts cell coordination and throws the slower chemical auxin system out of balance.
Could the rapid ion flux electrical language be the ultimate first mechanism by which plants initially perceive and begin to counteract gravitational disorientation?
You mean, could those fast electrical pulses be the very first signal of imbalance? Kicking in instantly, long before the slower chemical systems like auxin transport can fully engage.
Exactly.
It raises a provocative question. Is the plant's electrical system not just a responsive pathway, but the fundamental, lightning-fast adaptive tool it uses for immediate survival in extreme environments? You know, places like zero-G, where mechanical and chemical systems are so prone to failure.
It would imply the electrical current of a plant is its core mechanism for sensing and, well, fighting for its life.
A completely silent, high-speed electrical intelligence hidden right there in our garden.
That is certainly something to ponder the next time you look at a rooted vine. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.